Okay, for those who do not know me, my name is Marcus. I'm a young adult in the Project Timothy ministry in this church. It is one of our young adult ministry. Yeah. Never in my life, right, will I imagine myself standing here on stage, speaking to you guys, and sharing my stories, sharing my faith. Because 4 years ago, I actually left the church. I actually turned away from God completely, and I basically rejected to be a Christian because I was in my second year of my diploma studies, and I was faced with a decision, or rather I was faced with a situation where I have to make a choice between choosing God or this world. And after much struggling and prayer, I decided to choose this world because back then, my studies was my most important thing in the world. Like, it was my highest priority in my life back then at that point. And to just give some context as to why this was so important in my life back then, is because for most of my early 20s, I was actually, or rather, I wasted most of my life just deciding what I wanted to do. I didn't really accomplish much. I was just playing, just enjoying my life. And so by the time I reached my late 20s, I was quite worried about what I'll be doing in the future. Because back then, I didn't really have any qualification either. And so this opportunity came to me where I was able to study what I wanted, it was really important to me. I didn't want to ruin it. I didn't want to waste it. But yet, at this point of my life, I was faced with a decision where I had to choose between God and this world. So the reason why I had to choose is because I was faced with Saturday classes, and it was a requirement for me that I needed to attend these classes to hit the minimum attendance so that I can graduate. But because due to my belief that I wanted to come to church on a Saturday, I wanted to keep the Sabbath, and so it conflicted with my belief, and that is why it was such a struggle. In the past few weeks, we have been talking about what does it mean to be sanctified by faith, and what does it mean to live by faith? And today, I want to talk about what does it mean to live by faith. And this is what I'll be sharing with you guys today, my thoughts and experience with living by faith. So if you can turn to the Bible with me, the verses are also on the slide. We'll be reading from Romans chapter 8, verses 5 to 8. So the verses shown on the slide is in English Standard Version. Yeah. So it says, "For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh. But those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit. For to set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. For the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. Those who are in the flesh cannot please God." Now, to give some context as to what Paul is writing here, back then, when he wrote this letter, he was writing to the church in Rome back then. The audience that he's writing to were Christians, they were Jews, they were Gentiles. So these were people that know about the gospel, they know about Jesus Christ. So the first verse, it says, "For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit." Now, it is quite obvious what Paul is trying to say here, right? It's basically we live our life according to what we set our minds on. And that's quite obvious, isn't it? Back to my story earlier, when I chose this world over God, when I chose to attend my Saturday classes instead of coming to church, instead of keeping the Sabbath. I chose this role because I was afraid of the uncertainties that I would face in the future. All I could think about back then was the limitations that I would face if I do not complete my education. And that is why I chose this role. And living in Singapore, I'm sure most of us know how competitive it is, right? Like, if you don't have a qualification, chances are you're not able to do what you want to do, right? And even if you have a qualification, it's still very hard to find a job sometimes. And so, despite me seeking God in prayer back then, asking Him for help me to make a decision, that will be good for me. But when I was asking God in prayer, I was seeking Him, I've already decided what I want. And I was just asking God for that one thing, which is for Him to exempt me from my Saturday classes so that I can, complete my course while still keeping the Sabbath. However, that did not happen because I wrote into the school, I appealed to my lecturers, my vice dean, anyone that I can appeal to. I tried, and I just can't be excused from it. So I had to choose. And so when I was seeking God back then, for help, it was more of me demanding God what I want. It's like, please do this for me right now. It's like I was giving God an ultimatum, It's like, if you don't do this, I'll leave Him. But it says to live according to the Spirit is to set our minds on the things of the Spirit. But how do we set our mind on the things of the Spirit? And so back then, I was in a relationship with God on my own terms because I was demanding, God, please help me with this. Even though I thought I was in a relationship with God, because of my belief, because I wanted to keep the Sabbath, I thought I was in a relationship with God. But I was in a relationship with God on my own terms only because I wasn't listening to Him. I was simply asking God to do what I want. I didn't even consider His opinion. I just want to share, I think it was 1 year ago, I was actually in a serious relationship, and it was my first relationship actually, or rather my first serious relationship. However, that only lasted 2 months. And the reason why it only lasted so short, because in that relationship, all I did was simply give in to my partner's needs, and my opinion didn't matter at all in the relationship. No matter what I say, no matter what I wanted, I felt like I wasn't being listened, and all I could do was just give in, because otherwise I would not please the other person. And so that made me feel miserable. That made me feel as if I was an object being used by someone. It made me feel like I wasn't being appreciated for who I am. And so it was a very one-sided relationship. It is definitely not a healthy relationship. However, my relationship with God back then was kind of like this, right? Like, I was just asking God for things that I want. I wasn't even listening to His opinion. I didn't even consider what He has to say for me. Not listening to God in our relationship, sometimes it may feel like we will not enjoy our lives, right? Like, if we follow God, we feel like He will not allow us to enjoy our lives, Doesn't it feel that way sometimes? Even now, sometimes it's like, if we follow God, like, can we really enjoy our lives, or are we being restricted? It may lead us to where we do not want to go, but did God not say that He only wants the best for us? In Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11, it says, For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Now, does this verse, right, sound like God wants us to suffer? Does it sound like He wants us to have a miserable life? Does it sound like He just wants us to eat cai pen every day, not by choice? It's like we just have to live with the bare minimum? Does it sound like God is not going to give us financial freedom that we so crave for? No, right? It says, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. It sounds hopeful, right? It sounds good. We feel like we might not prosper and just live an okay life if we follow God. In fact, if you feel like if we follow God, maybe God will put us through a weird or uncertain path, and that makes us very uncomfortable. And that's very normal because that's very human. That's a very human way to think. Even I think that way as well. But that's the reality of following Christ. That's the reality of being in a relationship with Him, isn't it? Because what kind of relationship doesn't have uncertainties? Like your relationship with your partner, your relationship with your family, your friends. I'm sure there are uncertainties, right? That we don't know everything, that what the relationship will become or where it will lead. And so there will definitely be uncertainties in our relationship with God as well. But the difference between our human relationships and our relationship with God is that we know that we have a God that is reliable, that is trustworthy, that He doesn't go back on His words, that He doesn't make mistakes. Unlike us humans, we are flawed because we are sinners, right? As much as we like to think that we do not make mistakes, but we do. And so, earlier when I asked, what does it mean to set our mind on the Spirit? And from what I've learned, it means to listen and consider God's opinion in our relationship with Him. Because are we really in a relationship with Him if we only ask for what we want and we don't even listen to His opinion? Because God desires a relationship with us, right? And if that relationship is just one-sided, it will never work. It is easy to say, we set our mind on things of the Spirit, It's easy to say that, we listen to God's opinion with Him when life is smooth, when we get whatever we ask for, But what if He doesn't give us what we ask for? Is it easy to listen and consider His opinions then? Being in a relationship is not just, asking for what you want, but it's also listening to what the other person wants for the relationship. It's about talking about your struggle with Him. Talk through your uncertainties, talk through your feelings with Him. We do not have the foresight to see the future, but God does. In Romans chapter 8, verse 6, it continues to say, "For to set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace." After choosing this world, after I decided to turn away from God, I actually had a sense of relief because it felt like I finally had freedom. It felt like I was finally able to do whatever I want. It felt like I was being restricted anymore. I don't have to worry about, if I do this, it's bad, I'm sinning. I don't have to think about all this. It's my Saturdays are now free. I can just do whatever I want. I don't have to worry about keeping the Sabbath, It felt so good not having to worry about all these things. It felt like I finally had freedom, However, that did not last long because that illusion of true freedom without God was setting in over time. Okay, so this is a double down from KFC. For those who don't know what it is, it's basically a bacon with cheese sandwiched together with 2 chicken patties. And I know like this probably looks like disgusting or like unhealthy to some of you, but back then when it was first released, right, it was the most delicious thing I've ever eaten. Like honestly, when I first ate it, I thought it was heaven. Like whoever created this, right, is a genius. And so, but back then I only ate 1 of it, right? And what's better than 1? 2. So I thought, why not eat 2 in 1 sitting, you know? I thought it'd be great. But turns out it wasn't. And so as I was like halfway through the second one, my whole body felt horrible. Like my throat can feel all the oil, the grease. And yeah, my stomach wasn't feeling well as well. And I just feel like quitting eating for life because I felt so horrible. But I thought it was good, right? Like, if I eat more, wouldn't it be better? But turns out it wasn't. As I lived my life without God, back then, it went from freedom to I just want to end my life. Because I had no purpose, I had no sight of what I was doing. I was down all the time because of the stress that I was facing in school. And I had to cope with it somehow, and so I turned to worldly temptations. I gave in to sexual temptations in hope that it would make me feel better about myself, in hope that it would help me relieve the stress that I was facing. In fact, it did not. It did the opposite. It made me feel worse about myself. The more I indulged in it, the more empty and guilty I felt. I was relying on it not just to cope with the stress, but because I was also feeling lonely. Because back then, when I turned away from God, I also turned away from most of my friends, even my family, because I felt guilty of what I did. Even though it was my own doing, but I chose to turn away. I rejected everyone in my life, and I felt lonely. I would wake up every day feeling dreadful because I had lost purpose, I had lost sight of what I was doing. I don't even know if this thing that I'm studying is worth it anymore. Choosing God, choosing this world over God did not give me freedom. It did not make me feel peace. Even though I thought I had freedom at first, but that was just an illusion. Now, have you guys heard about the term 996? I'm sure it's like most working adults would know about this. And it basically refers to the hustle culture in China that encourages working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. And that's basically 72 hours a week. If you do the math right, that's basically half your week dedicated to work. And that's not even like including your free time or whatever. And so it's a lot of time just dedicated to work. Like you're basically a machine, you're just being used to work for the country. However, because the reason being, if they don't do such long hours, they will not succeed in life. That's what they are being told. Due to the pressure of higher standards of living, right, and the need to always earn more, otherwise you'll fall behind your peers and not attain the freedom or attain the retirement that you so crave for. However, many younger generations now are actually protesting against this movement because many are starting to realize that it is not worth it to sell your soul just for money. Even though this is referring to China, but we in Singapore, don't we do the same? Don't we sell our soul for money sometimes? Don't we sell our soul for the sake of our enjoyment sometimes? I myself, I am guilty of living for the sake of money. Because in the past 3 years, I've been switching jobs every year. And that's only because, I had a better offer. I had better, someone offer a higher salary, and so I took it. That was my only consideration of switching jobs. One of the working hours at these places were good. I didn't have to work 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., but it has made me become more greedy as a person. I started to prioritize my earnings over God instead. The competitiveness of this world, right, it has embedded this toxic mentality in us that we have to commit our lives to work, to earning, to increasing our earning power and everything. Otherwise, we would not have the freedom or peaceful life that we want, that we will not attain financial freedom, that we will not able to support our family. But what is the Bible saying about this, really? It says, for to set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. I want to emphasize on the last part. It says to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. Not to set our mind on financial freedom is life and peace, right? It says to set the mind on the Spirit. But what does it mean to set our mind on the Spirit? And as I've mentioned earlier, from what I've learned, and that is to listen and consider God's opinion in our relationship with Him, in what He has revealed to us. He continues on saying, for the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law, indeed it cannot. As we have seen what the world has to offer, it's completely opposite of what God is trying to tell us, right? Like the world's teaching and God's teaching is the opposite. It conflicts. Because working 12 hours every day is not going to give you life. Working 12 hours every day is definitely not going to help you in your relationships. Demanding what we want from God in a relationship is not going to give us peace or life. When I chose this world over God back then in my studies, I shared that I rely on sexual temptations to help me cope with stress and loneliness. Because of this, right, because of what I was doing, because of what I was relying on, I was very easily agitated. I didn't even care if people would worry about me. I was so selfish and narrow-minded. I was just living for myself. Like all I could think about was me. It's all about me. I don't care what other people think. I was very self-centered. But is that what Jesus came down to earth for? Did He came down to earth to live for Himself? He came down to earth to fulfill the laws that we could not obey, right? We could not fulfill by ourselves. He came to save us even though He doesn't have to. Jesus did not come down to earth to live for Himself. He came down to this earth so that we can live. It's the opposite, right? It's the opposite of what I was doing. And lastly, it says, those who are in the flesh cannot please God. If you love someone, you will want to please them. Am I right? Is it wrong to say if we are in a loving relationship with God, with someone, we will want to please them? Because that is what love compels us to do. Am I right? If you are in love with this world, we can never be in a relationship with God. Because they are complete opposite. We're not able to listen to what He has to say because we are so focused on what this world is telling us rather than what God wants for us with Him. Paul talks about setting our mind on the Spirit. But what is it really trying to say? Because being able to look back on my life, if I chose to follow God instead of this world, I would have saved a lot more time in my life because I ended up regretting my studies. When I finished it, I regretted it. I realized that God was actually offering me a way out of my situation that He knew I would regret later. Because after working in my current industry for a few years, I've seen things that made me uncomfortable, that made me doesn't want to be in there anymore. And I'm glad God has revealed these reasons to me. Because it's because of this that I've learned of His wisdom, that I've learned to believe in what He's trying to tell me, even though it doesn't make sense. Even though some might say that being in a relationship is restrictive, but that's inherent in any relationship. It is restrictive. But in the context of love, it is not. It is freedom. Because ever since then, I've been in a serious relationship now for almost a year, and there's nothing that I would want to do to devastate my partner, right? I wouldn't want to cheat on my partner because I love her. And is that restriction? Is that restrictive? In the context of love, it is not. In the context of love, it is freeing. And that is why to live by faith is to live in a relationship with God, not just on our own terms, but to listen to Him as well. Right now, you may be going through a point in life where you are choosing between God and this world. Maybe your relationship with God has been one-sided, where you're simply asking Him for what you want, and if He's not showing you, you just assume that He's not listening. Maybe you're in a toxic relationship that you do not want to get out of because you're afraid of being lonely. Maybe this path, the path that God is showing us, is one that is filled with uncertainties. Maybe you're experiencing freedom without God, and that just feels so much better than with God. Or perhaps you have been so self-centered that you've neglected all your relationships, that you've neglected the people you love. If you're going through any of this, I just want to assure you that God knows our struggle, that even though it may not seem like He's listening to us, it may not seem like He cares, but He knows. Now just take a few minutes each day, or even take a few hours each day if you need, to just have a genuine conversation with God, to talk about your feelings, to talk about your emotions. I know how dumb that sounds, but do it, because that's what you would do in a relationship, isn't it? You will talk about how you feel with the other person. If you're upset with them, tell them. Don't just hold it in. Because God wants to be all up in our lives. You don't have to worry about being naggy, because that's not how God sees us. The more we go to Him, the more He wants to be with us. And so just listen to Him and look around you and see what He's revealing to you. It may not be what you want, but if it's consistent with the Bible, if it's consistent with how He has been showing you, how He has been in your life, and deep down, if you know it is from God, and you choose to turn away from it, chances are you end up regretting it, just like me. I can assure you that you will not regret if you choose to be in a loving and intimate relationship with God, because that is what true freedom is. May we strive to grow our relationship with God each and every day, to be more loving and intimate with Him. May we close in prayer. Dear Father, Lord, I ask that whatever our relationship with You is like now, may You help us to reflect on whatever we are listening to, what You have to say, and or are we simply being in a relationship with You on our own terms only, Father? May Your love compel us, Lord. to be more intimate with you, that we can live life with true freedom. Thank you so much for listening to our prayer. All this I ask in the most loving Jesus' name I pray. Amen.